Hi friends, hey, welcome back to the Expeditionary Johnny channel. Hey, if you're new to my channel, you're going to see here the theme to my channel is to help to try to remove obstacles to getting outdoors. Typically, that could be things like time, ideas, or maybe equipment. So recently, I've had a few friends ask me to do like bow drill demonstrations, and I'm always happy to help out. And I realized I hadn't really done a good how-to bow drill video in a while, so I figured, hey, why not? Now, it turns out today is one of the worst days for bow drill. It rained last night, the materials are wet, and it's real misty in the air. So I'm going to give it my best shot, and let's see if we can get a fire. All right, let's start by taking a look at the components that we're going to need for our bow drill. What we're looking at is we're going to need a hearth board. All right, we're going to need a spindle, which looks a lot like a pencil. All right, this is going to rub on our hearth board to make our coal. Now on top of that, we're going to need a hand block, which sets on top like so, and then we're going to need a bow. All right, now that we've seen the components, let's go ahead and go through the process of how I got here, okay? Cottonwood is a nice soft wood, which means it's not really strong. Now combine that with the fact that we have some very high winds out here in Nebraska. It is a common sight to find a big old branch that's snapped off during a recent storm, like this one right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off a section of this that's going to be at least as wide as my hand, a bit longer, so as I whittle it down, I'll find the good wood, okay? Now let me show you something about cottonwood. Like tulip poplar back east, cottonwood has this inner bark here. And see how it's got long fibrous strips here? What we do is we gather up as much as this is possible. Then we kind of break it up and we make a bird's nest. And we're going to put our ember from our bow drill into this to get flame. Now, it did rain here last night, so I'm going to have to kind of let this sit out and dry a bit, okay? Again, that's something to consider in your fire plan. All right, this is what I was really looking for. Look at this piece. See all these nice long strands? This is going to be great for our bird's nest material. So I'm just going to keep gathering this, and then we'll work on processing our hearth and spindle. All right, folks, so you can see I've gathered up a bit of inner bark here for our bird's nest. We're going to set that aside, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. All right, so we're going to take our length of cottonwood here, and we're going to baton it, which means I'm just going to take my knife to the top of this, and we'll use that to split the wood. That's going to help us get into the good dry wood that's on the inside, and to help us decide what part's going to be the hearth, what's going to be the spindle. All right, now that we've batoned our wood, let's take a look at it and to see what we're working with here. All right, so this first piece here, you see we've got this knot. So we're going to have to work around that one. That's not good material to be working for bow drill, but we do have quite a bit to work with here. So I can actually whittle off and flatten out this side here, and that'll be good for a hearth board. Also, as well over here. So I'm going to work on that a little bit. The thing I don't like is it is a bit wet on the outside because of all the rain. But I've worked with worse, and I think we'll be okay. All right, so this next piece has a branch, and also you're going to see that knot. Also not great to work with. Now this is my favorite piece out of the whole bit. You can see it's a little bit crooked, but there's enough material that I can whittle it down to either get a nice straight spindle, or it could actually be a good hearth board. So let me start working with the material, and we'll let the wood tell me what to do with it. All right, here's what I've decided to do. After whittling off a little bit of this, I've decided I can work with this wood. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my saw and I'm going to cut off this little branch and I'm going to whittle it down. Now why? The reason why I'm doing this today is I'm going to push myself, and I also want to show you that you don't always have to have the most perfect materials. Now, when you're first starting out, get as perfect as you can get. You can even go to the store and buy materials. But this is the realities. You might be stuck with working with less than perfect materials, so practice with it. Now that I've cut off that branch, I have more than enough material here. So let's turn this over here and see how this bends. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to start whittling away at that. All right, I'm getting happier and happier with this spindle here. So the top part's nice and dry. So it should stand up to the pressure as I lean down on with our bearing block. All right, our nut, not really a problem right now. What I have to do is work on this other end, just get it down to the correct thickness. We're looking something like the thickness of my thumb, so a little bit more, get rid of some of this wet stuff, and we'll work on our hearthboard. All right, now that I'm done working on my spindle, let's go ahead and concentrate on our hearthboard. I'm going to be using this piece of wood right here. Again, not nearly perfect, but that's why we test ourselves here. On this piece, I see potential for an ember over here, maybe over here, and then also I can get some more over here. So let's go ahead and flatten out the bottom surface, square up our corners here, and let's see what we have to work with. All right, hearthboard is nearly complete. I can't say I'm totally happy with it, but I think it's close enough for me to start playing around with it. All right, so you can see I've kind of flattened off the bottom here. It's still about as thick as my thumb. What I did differently is normally on cottonwood, I'll go ahead and baton the middle of it and get rid of this brown section, but because it's so wet on the outside, I thought I'd go ahead and leave it in here today. I've smoothed out the top. Still working around these knots. So I only got a few places on here I can work with. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just put this up next to my body, let it dry out a little bit while we work on our bird's nest and our bow and hand block. All right, let's start working on our next component, the actual bow for our bow drill. All right, so this does not have to be anything fancy at all. All right, I like a nice long branch, at least good arm's length, right? I found I like something with a little wide branch at the end, so where there used to be a small branch going off here, I want to make a fixed loop, tie it on there. The other end, nothing fancy. I just take our saw and just kind of carve in these little grooves, and we're going to wrap our bank line around that, and we'll have a bow. All right, so let's go ahead and attach our cordage to our bow. Let's make a fixed loop. All right, the easy way is to just take the work end of your cordage, make a hitch, right, like so, and then just do an overhand knot, like so. Ta-da! Next, we just attach it to our Y branch, like so. All right, now to attach our cordage to the bottom part of our branch, I'm just going to simply wrap our cordage around where we got that groove that we used our saw at, and then take the cordage back through, like so, and then I'm just going to adjust the tension that way. All right, so I'm going to start with about this much tension. I've got this much play because it has to wrap around our spindle. And we can always make some adjustments later. But from here, since I've already went ahead and went back around the cordage, we just wrap around like so. And I'm going to use my hand to hold it in place. That's all. And our last component is our hand block. Now this one is just a piece of hardwood that I use. Now to prep it, all we do is we take our knife, go to the underside, and then we just shave off a little off the bottom. Not much. It really doesn't take anything, guys. And then we're just going to take the tip of our knife and just make a little divot in there, and that's going to be where the top of our spindle goes in, or the pencil point. All right. All right, to make our bird's nest, we just take the inner bark from our cottonwood here. And then we're going to go ahead and shred it up. Kind of work it a little bit so we get a bunch of little fine pieces. All right, so we've got all of our components. Now let's see if I can actually get an ember to make a bow drill fire. All right, I will let you know, I've been storing this hearthboard and this spindle inside my socks along my shins to try to get a little bit of a body heat on this, because these are still a little bit on the moist side. And with all the humidity in the air, I'm going to be really challenged to get a good ember, but we're going to try. All right, I do need to do a little bit of finish work here on our spindle. You see I've got a pointed end, which looks like the sharp end of a pencil. That's going to go on our hand block. And then on the other end, this is where it's going to go on the hearthboard. So I need to round out the edge at the bottom here, and then we're going to do a burn in into our hearthboard. Okay, so I've rounded out the bottom of our spindle. This is the part that's going to go on our hearthboard. So I left a little bit of a tip to have that go onto our hearthboard. Our hearthboard has a knot on it right here, so I'm going to try to work around that. So let's go ahead and just make a small groove over a little dimple on this side. Take our spindle up, twist it around, walk it back. All right, so this wood is still really moist. All right, so the tip part of our spindle, you can see I'm starting to generate a bit of heat. That's not what I'm looking for. I got to generate some heat down here at the bottom. So let me see what I can do with it. I'm gonna play around with it for a little bit. All right, some time has gone by. It just started raining here, and it was just way too wet for me to get this bow drill fire started. So I went ahead and took cover, and I've just been trying to let my hearthboard and spindle dry out a little bit. You can see I made a couple different attempts here. All I did was just, I got some heat here on the hand block, but zero progress on my hearthboard or on my spindle. So let's take another stab at it. All right, so let's go ahead and sharpen up our point here. This feels a lot better than it did a couple hours ago. Let's tuck my pants into my socks here so that doesn't get in the way. This is going to be tough. It took quite a bit of pressure to get this burn in, and my spindle is quite a bit shorter at the top, but we're going to try. All right, what I'm going to do now is take the saw on my Farmer Swiss Army knife and carve out a pie notch here on this hearthboard, so we have a place for our ash to drop and build a coal. Now I'm going to take my knife in here and just kind of carve it out a little bit more. Alright, so I've carved out a little pie wedge here, and you can see it's kind of beveled at the bottom where it opens up wider, so we can, the ash doesn't get too compact in there. Let it breathe a little bit. Alright, let's see if we can make this happen. Alright, starting another area on this hand block. I'm really going through it today. All right, we got it. barely made it. This thing was nippling out and I was drifting on the wood, so I was running out of attempts. All right, all we do now is take our coal, drop that in our bird's nest. All right, now we let it sit here for a minute and warm up our materials. Although you can see the way the smoke is coming toward the camera, so that might help a little bit. I'm getting some good smoke, so I'm going to go ahead and fold this in like a taco here, like this. And let's see if we can get a fire. All right, see how? So this is making a lot of smoke, but it hasn't flamed up. That tells you it's still pretty moist. All right, we got a coal in there. I had a flame for a second. There we are, fire. Easy enough, right? Not so much. All right, friends, well, this brings us to the end of another video. I hope you really enjoyed this one, or at least got some ideas on what you can do for your fire plan, or maybe whether or not you want to take on the challenge of friction fire, going back to old caveman technology. Can't tell you how satisfying it is. It is really neat. Not that it's going to be my primary means of making a fire. As I said, I would rather do char cloth or Vaseline cotton ball any day of the week. But it is fun to know that you know how to do it, and it really does help you work on your fundamentals when you are making that fire, okay? Well, with that being said, y'all take care. Have a good week.